News at 1, my name is Tabitha Muthoni. ANC party leader Musalia Mudavadi now wants the government to review the fuel pricing formula after the latest upward price review by the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority. In a statement last evening, the ANC leader said that the Ministry of Energy had failed Kenyans and should take responsibility for the situation. On Sunday, EPRA increased the maximum wholesale and retail petroleum prices for the next 1 month by nearly 15%.
For as long as we have these distortions in the energy sector, we are not going to achieve the competitiveness that we ought to achieve in making us the premier economy in this region. The Ministry of Energy has been failing us. Kenyans have been subsidizing too much those who are doing business here. And the classic example is when the government itself, and this one we commend, that they have actually started reviewing the power purchase agreements, because these have been very expensive agreements which have made it very difficult for Kenyans to access energy. The ministry, as a matter of urgency, must do the following. 1, revise the formula used in pricing fuel. 2, review the tax regime on fuel products. A tax equivalent to 100% of pump price is unsustainable, punitive, and inflationary to the Kenyan people. The tax regime should also provide incentives for investments in clean and renewable energy. The Ministry of Energy has always done is to pass the increased costs to the mwananchi and business community to their detriment, while guaranteeing higher profit margins for oil marketers. Changes in the computation of the applicable taxation regime have resulted in higher pump prices. In fact, taxes now comprise roughly 60% of the pump price for petrol, diesel, and kerosene. It is totally unacceptable for petrol to retail at 122.81 shillings in Nairobi, when the landing cost is 49 shillings 0.84 cents.
Meanwhile, Kenya's insatiable appetite for higher revenue is one of the reasons why the price of fuel is high, causing more pain to Kenyans as the cost of living also soars. Following latest price review by the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority (EPRA) on Sunday, retail prices of super petrol, diesel, and kerosene have shot up to 122 shillings 0.81 and 107.66 shillings and 97.85 shillings respectively in Nairobi. These as Kenyans pay 9 different taxes and levies on the products. The levies include excise duty of 21.95 shillings per litre of petrol and 11.37 shillings on a litre of diesel and kerosene. Kenyans are also paying 18 shillings per litre of petrol and diesel as road maintenance levy, 5.4 shillings as petroleum development levy, and 0.25 shillings per litre as petroleum regulatory levy. The new prices also bear 0.95 shillings per litre of petrol as the railway development levy, 18 shillings per litre of kerosene as anti-adulteration levy, and 0.03 shillings per litre as merchant shipping levy. Import declaration fee takes 1.65 shillings per litre of petrol, while value-added tax VAT is at 9.1 shillings for petrol, 7.97 shillings for diesel, and 7.25 shillings for kerosene. Not too much as COVID-19 and Germany, Italy and France are the latest European countries to suspend the use of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. This follows concerns over bleeding and blood clots that have been previously reported. Suspending the use of the vaccine, President Emmanuel Macron of France expressed reasonable concern over the vaccine, although cautious not to raise panic. The German Health Ministry equally announced that it was suspending the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine. The ministry termed the suspension as precaution and on the advice of the national vaccine regulator, the Paul Ehrlich Institute, which called for further investigation of the cases. German health minister said although the risk of blood clots was low, it could not be ruled out. Netherlands have also suspended the inoculation process using AstraZeneca, which will last until at least 29th of March, was a precaution. 8 countries have so far fully suspended the AstraZeneca vaccinations. The Irish Republic, Denmark, Norway, Bulgaria and Iceland have paused inoculations with the vaccine, while the Democratic Republic of Congo and Indonesia have delayed the start of their AstraZeneca rollouts. Several European countries, including Italy and Austria, have suspended the use of certain batches of the drug as a precautionary measure. Following concerns over the safety of the vaccine, the World Health Organization is set to meet today. However, ahead of the meeting, the World Health Organization and the European Medicines Agency say there is no indication of a link between the vaccine and reports of blood clots. WHO maintains that it is important that vaccination campaigns continued. According to AstraZeneca, about 17 million people in the EU and UK have received a dose of the vaccine, with fewer than 40 cases of blood clots reported as of last week. The company had said that the 15 incidences of deep vein thrombosis and 22 events of pulmonary embolism reported among those given the vaccine was much lower than would be expected to occur naturally in a general population of this size, and is similar across other licensed COVID-19 vaccines. AstraZeneca has the second highest worldwide reach, being used in 65 countries, behind Pfizer-BioNTech, which is in 70 countries. Now moving on, Kenya will today miss the second day of the hearing on the maritime border dispute with Somalia. The week-long hearing by the United Nations highest court is expected to run through to the 24th of this month. Earlier this week, Kenya announced an 11th-hour decision to withdraw from the case, citing bias and unwillingness by the International Court of Justice to grant the postponement request. The ICJ President Judge Joan Doni rejected Kenya's request to brief the court before the start of Monday's opening. The court plans to use a raft of material previously filed by Kenya in arguing its side of the case. This even as fishermen in Lamu held demonstrations on Monday seeking to be involved in the proceedings. The fishermen claimed there are fears that they could lose a chunk of their fishing ground, effectively affecting their livelihoods. The Kenya-Somalia dispute is centered on 100,000 square kilometers of Indian Ocean waters rich in fish and possibly also oil and gas. In his opening arguments, Somalia's Deputy Prime Minister Mahdi Mohamed Guled described the dispute as of key national importance to his country. Kenya's decision to withdraw from the case adds to an already mounting diplomatic friction between Nairobi and Mogadishu. And now the Kenya Tourism Board says it is nearly impossible to make any projections for tourism for the year 2021 after the sector was badly ravaged by the coronavirus pandemic last year. According to KTB, Chief Executive Officer Dr. Betty Rodia, even domestic tourism may not pick up as quickly and steadily as had been earlier projected in the wake of the rising number of infections in the country. Rodia spoke to Metropol TV's Oniro Oganga, putting into context the tourism industry's performance and outlook amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
On the 13th of March, it was announced that COVID-19 had arrived in the country. The first case was reported, and this meant that drastic measures like closure of borders was going to happen. As a CEO of Kenya Tourism Board, what went through your mind then and when you thought about tourism surviving amid a pandemic?
Okay, first, I think the first reaction was, oh my goodness, travel is about movement, which means if you curtail movement, it means an industry is basically non-existent. So that's the first thing that went through our mind, but it happened to everybody globally. So from the perspective of understanding that this was a necessary thing that had to happen, I think we very quickly overcame that hurdle that said everything is closed, and therefore we moved on to other strategies. And the strategy that we moved on to was a digital-based strategy, which said, if people can't travel, what will they do? And very quickly there was a surgence of people on social media, people on digital, and people looking to technology to be able to connect with what was going on globally. We then latched onto that and began to run campaigns. The initial messaging was around stay home, stay safe.
Yes.
So we ran a campaign that allowed people to understand that you needed to stay home and stay safe so you can travel later. So that was our first campaign. And as the different markets went through the various stages of COVID, we were able then to message about the destination. We immediately ran a virtual safari that allowed people every day to go on safari virtually. And that kept the destination alive. We then, as we moved towards a time when there was an easing of restriction, where people were allowed to possibly get out of their homes for a bit, were then able to tell them the message was around the magic awaits. So all through that period, we just immediately moved on to a phase that allowed people to remember that the destination continued to exist, and just told them and reminded them why they must just look forward to when the travel opens up, because it was affecting everybody globally, and they would then be able to travel to their favorite destination again.
Yeah. What impact did the lockdown and lack of movement, people and goods cause to the tourism sector before we just go to the reopening of the economy?
It was a huge impact. We lost about 80% of revenue from the point that we had started off in 2019. We saw a decline of about 80% in the industry, and this was global, running into billions of shillings in terms of tourism income and revenue. So this was something that was unprecedented. There was nothing anybody could do about it. But the business of tourism is about moving around. So if people can't move around, it means they really cannot consume the product. And that's just the way the pandemic panned out.
Now, come August, the country was reopened for both international and local travel. However, we could not turn a blind eye to the fact that there was second waves and now third waves, and that leaves domestic markets to be the backbone and foundation of thriving of tourism and recovery. Let's talk briefly about that.
So most markets globally have had a second wave and third waves, as you said, but also the guidance and directives around these markets have been restricted travel. And therefore you find that domestic travel becomes the first port of call for most people, because remember, travel has to have a consumer and a supplier. So the consumer is the individuals that have to feel safe enough. So with the Magical Kenya travel protocols that we put in place, it went a long way to make people understand that the destination is safe. But having said that, there's protocols within different countries that restrict travel, things like quarantine when they go back to their destinations. So what you find is people prefer to travel in and around their locality, because then they don't have that challenge around quarantine when they go back. They don't have the challenge now that is coming up about retesting and that sort of thing. So for the foreseeable future, we appreciate that you will probably have domestic as the latent market for most markets, not just in Africa, but also in Europe. And if you see the messaging around how it is that most destinations are advising travelers is avoid non-essential travel. So that in itself is almost a travel restriction that people have to overcome as they get a lot more comfortable recovering with COVID and recovering with the presence of the vaccine.
How has domestic tourism performed in the country since August, and what do we need to do to sort of inject vibrancy back into it in terms of costing, packages, and even selling experiences?
So domestic tourism has actually been the only tourism that we've had, largely the only tourism that has been sort of active in the domestic market. It's seen a slight recovery from the period when we opened up in the 1st of August. It is still almost about 60% down from the year before, but at least it has begun to spur the industry. What's going to happen, I think, in the immediate future is working with our stakeholders and partners, such as airlines and access, these are rails, road, this is what is going to help us to recover. The partners that we have to understand that the market that we have is a domestic market. It's a completely different sort of clientele, and therefore products need to be tailor-made to be suitable to the domestic traveler. And this has to do with flexibility around booking. It has to do with flexibility around lead times for booking, because that's just, people don't necessarily book a month in advance or 2 months in advance. So there's a learning curve for the traveler domestically, but also there's a learning curve for the providers of the service. Yeah.
Finally, as we wind up, what would be your projection for domestic tourism growth in 2021?
It's difficult to say because of two reasons. The first reason is that we are currently not outside of the pandemic, right? So just yesterday there was announcement that our positivity rate has moved up from 2% to 10%. There's a talk of another wave coming up. So I don't think it is possible to predict what is going to happen, even with domestic, in light of the pandemic. The vaccine will go a long way in terms of creating comfort and confidence amongst people, but until that kicks in and there's enough to go around, it would be foolhardy to say, okay, I think it will grow by 50%, because you don't really know. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Meanwhile, the African Guarantee Fund, AGF, and Equity Group Holdings PLC have signed an agreement which will provide a USD 75 million US dollars, which is an equivalent of 8.25 billion Kenya shillings guarantee fund to 4 of Equity's bank subsidiaries within the group. The facility is earmarked to support Equity to scale up its lending activities to women-owned and managed micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and DRC, ensuring women are able to access credit at affordable interest at a time when it's most needed. The 75 million US dollars guarantee fund will de-risk women-owned and managed MSMEs access credit at affordable interest rates so as to recover and thrive in a post-COVID-19 environment. The facility extends support to Equity Bank, Kenya, and 3 of the group's subsidiary operations in Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Speaking during the signing ceremony, Dr. James Mwenge, Managing Director and CEO of Equity Group Holdings, said the deal will strongly position Equity to continue offering its customers, particularly women in business, access to funding at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact negatively on businesses. The new facility comes on the heels of an 11 billion shillings credit facility with leading European development banks 2 weeks ago. This latest deal is the 5th tranche for Equity Group after having signed 5.5 billion shillings loan facility with IFC in September, an 11 billion shillings from Proparco in October, and a 16.5 billion shillings loan facility signed 2 weeks ago with the European Investment Bank, and an 11 billion shillings credit facility with 3 leading European development banks. And now let's look at the Forex numbers at this hour. Now on our weather forecast, expect rainfall this week. That is the message from the Kenya Meteorological Department. In its weekly forecast, the weatherman says rainfall is expected over a few areas in the Lake Victoria Basin, the highlands west of the Rift Valley, the central and south Rift Valley, and the highlands east of the Rift Valley and the northeast. The forecast further shows that the northwest, the coastal strip, and the southeast and lowlands are likely to be generally dry. Several areas in the northwest, a few in the northeast and southeast and lowlands are likely to experience strong southeasterly to easterly winds with speeds exceeding 25 knots. That's it for your weather forecast. My name is Tabitha Mothoni. Do stay tuned for the rest of our programming. Have a good afternoon.